Charlie Kirk was, or perhaps still is, in the echo of memory. One of those figures who seemed less like a person and more like a revolving door between a youth rally, a podcast studio, and a political war room. Born in 1993, which means that at his time of death in 2025, he was both too young to be called old and too old to be called the future. He essentially built a brand out of arguing that conservatism was the new counterculture while simultaneously trying to make it the mainstream establishment. His group is called the Turning Point USA, and it resembled a mixture of pep rally, megachurch, and corporate booth at a trade show, except instead of selling gadgets, it sold an entire worldview. He thrived in the paradox of being anti elite while constantly dining with elites, being anti establishment while basking in the establishment's media spotlight. He was, in short, a salesman of ideology who sometimes blurred into the very product that he was selling, a kind of self branded permanent campaign. The thing about Charlie was that he always seemed to exist in two registers at once, either earnest and ironic, or serious and satirical, radical and deeply conventional. He framed himself as the inheritor of Reagan, but acted like the influencer child of YouTube algorithms, using memes as if they were the Federalist Papers and campus debates as if they were battlefields. His opponents thought of him as a provocateur without depth. His supporters thought of him as the Moses of a movement. But the confusing part is that he almost invited that duality, almost engineered it. He would host conferences where teenagers waved flags like they were at a rock concert, and then he'd publish books trying to sound like a seasoned philosopher. He was not really either. In the end, the role he played was neither teacher nor clown, but rather a mirror, reflecting what young conservatives thought they wanted to see. Sometimes discipline, sometimes rebellion, sometimes just someone shouting back at a professor. When he died, the headlines called him an activist, but that word was always a little too flat for what he actually was. It was more like a cultural algorithm. He didn't just do activism, he optimized it, broke it into slideshow slogans, sound bites, and 10-second TikTok videos. He specialized in creating energy without necessarily clarifying direction. Some say he mobilized a generation. Others say that he monetized one. His ability was not so much in converting skeptics as in amplifying believers, taking the young conservative who already felt alienated and giving him or her a stage, a sticker, maybe even a hashtag. In that sense, Charlie was not a traditional leader, but a curator of vibes. His relevance was bound less to the content of his speeches than to the sense that he made audiences feel like participants in something grand, even if the grandeur was mostly symbolic. After his passing, people are not debating just what he did, but whether what he did was something at all, or simply the art of appearing indispensable. You could call Charlie an entrepreneur of ideas, except that the ideas were really his. He packaged them. His genius, if one can even use that word, was in distribution, in recognizing that politics was no longer about policy papers, but about owning the conversation loops online. He never pretended to be a scholar, though he loved the aesthetics of scholarship, like charts and citations and intellectual debate staged like theater. He was more akin to a DJ, sampling the beats of conservative thought, remixing Reagan, Burke, and libertarian catchphrases into something palatable for teenagers scrolling between cat videos and lectures. This is why trying to define him is slippery. He wasn't a thinker in the traditional sense, nor purely an entertainer, nor just an activist. He was all three in all fragments. And the fragments never glued into a coherent whole. Now that he's gone, the fragments feel even more scattered, like shards of a broken screen. The confusion deepens when you consider his own relationship to power. He railed against institutions while courting them, criticized big money while fundraising from billionaires. He insisted on authenticity while living in perpetual performance. His detractors called this hypocrisy, his defenders called it strategy. But perhaps it was simply the inevitable condition of a man born in the digital attention economy, where every position was both a principle and a performance, every belief both deeply held and conveniently marketable. Even in death, people argue whether he was a true believer or just a savvy opportunist. Yeah, the truth might be that the distinction doesn't matter. He functioned precisely because he blurred that line. Charlie Kirk was the performance of Charlie Kirk. Baba, I'm recording. Thank you. Charlie Kirk was the performance of Charlie Kirk, and that recursive loop was the essence of his influence. He did not stand outside the spectacle, he became the spectacle. And that is why he remains difficult to pin down. So, who was Charlie Kirk? He was the preacher without a pulpit, the politician without office, the intellectual without footnotes, the entertainer without jokes. It was the product of a culture that wanted certainty but consumed spectacle, and it delivered both inconsistent doses. His life is confusing to recount because it is hard to separate the man from the medium, the biography from the brand. Was he a leader? In some ways. A follower? Absolutely. He followed algorithms, trends, donors. Was he a rebel? Sometimes, but only within carefully curated boundaries. The reality is that he was not just one thing, but the overlap of contradictions, contradictions that looked coherent only when the spotlight hit them just right. And now that the spotlight has turned off, what remains is a ghostly outline, a reminder that in modern politics, the person can vanish, but the brand lives on, endlessly recycled in memes, quotes, and hashtags that outlive the man himself.